So our second mailbag of the podcast, because and I thought the question was so good, I decided to drag Lance onto the show to talk about it on here. First off, I want to give Lance credit. He opened this email with "Chut Chut, guys," and I was like, "That's a good Star Wars poll."
Chut, chut.
I was like, "What?"
Chut Chut Watto. That's one of my favorite lines that Hayden gives. There's so much like sass to it.
Chut Chut Watto. And I'll sum up, but basically, I love this quote from Lance. The worst Star Wars made is still better than anything else. Or still better than the best anything else, including Lord of the Rings. We're going to get hate for that.
I had Lord of the Rings in mind when I wrote that, yeah.
This is going to make so many people mad.
This is a Lord of the Rings hate podcast now, and I will not be a part of it.
We'll talk. We'll have a Lord of the Rings episode. We'll have a not a Star Wars episode, and we'll talk about Lord of the Rings. But anyway, Lance's actual question. Star Wars is a very unique and difficult to define narrative aesthetic. Many of the more recent releases just don't feel right. Can you help define what it is that makes Star Wars, and why the mark is so often missed? So we do hear this a lot, especially in the last couple of years. I do want to unpack it. A lot of people online and in my personal life not vibing with a lot of the recent stuff. So let's start with Zach. What do you think makes Star Wars? What do you think makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars?
I think it comes down to influences. I think when Star Wars is best when it gets back to its influence roots, as like a theme to like make it feel Star Wars. Like Mandalorian is a Western, and like as soon as they were like, hey, we're gonna lean into this Western vibe, it felt more Star Wars than say the sequels. Like A New Hope is heavily influenced by so many different cultures, so I think it's when you lean into one of those cultures that you get that feel, because you get back to the original influences in George's mind, I mean, at one point he was like, the rebels are Viet Cong, which bold statement, George,
That went over great in the 70s.
Yeah, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so it's like I think when you lean into those influences, or what influences you as an artist, and really try and go very specific in referencing different cultures and different like themes and thematics of the original trilogy, that's when you get Star Wars. And the other thing that I think makes Star Wars feel Star Wars is practical effects. And we talked about it last week, like crunchy. Like the universe needs to feel real. It needs to have texture. It needs to feel like you could reach out and touch it, because the original trilogy did that. I mean, the Wampa, like he was fur. He was a shag carpet. Like when you felt that, you're like, when you were like at your grandma's house with a shag carpet, you're like, oh, that's like a Wampa, like, or like, oh, that's like a Wookiee, like it's tactile. It's stuff that you in your mind can be like, oh, that's alien, but I know what it is. That's a Wolfman. I know what that costume is. I can buy it down the street at Walgreens. Like it's that tactile and influenced driven storytelling.
Right on.
That's for me.
Lance. Yeah. So, Lance, to put you on the spot, I suppose, what do you think makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars?
Well, I'll start off by saying, if I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't have asked the two guys that know most about Star Wars that I know. I do not have the film background, the storytelling background that you guys have. So I'm looking at it as from kind of an outside perspective. The number one thing I could put my finger on is that they stopped having real good guys and real bad guys, and they started making both sides morally convoluted. The second that they said, and we'll bring up the Acolyte a little bit, but the second that they said that the Jedi is this big flawed, sometimes good, sometimes bad unit, and then we're going to provide sympathy for the Sith on the other side, So they're really equals. They're really these two dogmatic religious cults that are fighting against each other that have nothing to do with the rest of the galaxy. And I think that's wrong. I think the Jedi, at their most flawed, are still the good guys. You know, and are there bad Jedi? Yeah, it's like with any institution, you have individuals in there. But to say that because Mace Windu wanted to keep from the Senate the fact that they had lost connection with the Force, or actually I think it was Mace Windu that suggested that they should stop keeping that a secret. But either way, that doesn't make them bad, right? The fact that they're worried about losing a little bit of the influence in the galaxy, well, they're the good guys. They should have influence in the galaxy. If the Jedi get taken out of the equation by the Senate, we see what happens, right? I mean, everything falls to pieces. It becomes a dystopian future. So the Jedi aren't bad. They're always the good guys. And that's what really bothered me with Luke in The Last Jedi is Luke basically takes the stand that the Jedi have to die. The Jedi have never been what they were supposed to be. They're always this dogmatic gray, entity. And the Sith have to die for the same reason. And that's not true. And that's not the balance. You sent me something the other day about that, I think, in a text message. But that's not the balance that everybody thinks it is, right? It's not like the universe is in balance, and then you have the Jedi that's drawing it towards one side, and the Sith that are drawing it towards the other side. The Jedi are operating on a direct, pure relationship with the Force. And the Sith are perverting that for their own gain. So they're the ones pulling it out of balance, right? They're the ones pulling the canoe kind of out of the current, right? And the second that you get away, you make the Sith go away, the canoe rights itself and gets back into the current and goes down the river. And it's the same thing with Star Wars. But for some reason, and it's kind of this leftover postmodern moral ambiguity, moral relativism, right? Nobody's good, nobody's bad. You're only good or bad compared to something else that I think doesn't work with Star Wars. Look at Anakin, or not Anakin, Luke, baby Anakin. So Luke has this great. You made a comment earlier that Ahsoka has the best story arc as a hero. And I think that's true only because I think the sequel trilogy handles Luke oddly. But if you take that out of there and you just have 4, 5, and 6, Luke struggles with his own morality, right? What's the very first thing he does in Jedi? He walks in and Vader's the pig man, and kills him.
No, he doesn't kill him. He just incapacitates him.
Well, to be fair, we don't see. The Gamorrean guard is grabbing his neck and choking, and they cut away.
Well,
I don't think he kills him.
Either way, it's a very Sithy thing to do.
Yes.
And,
yeah, absolutely.
And he's all dressed in all black, right? And he's still a good guy, but he's really struggling with how he's going to respond to the universe after all this horrible, horrible stuff has happened. And then at the end, you see him, and he's got his lightsaber, and he's just like hacking in a rage on his own dad, right? And cuts his arm off and is going to kill him. And you see Palpatine is just giddy. This is the best thing that's ever happened to him, right? He's almost giggling in his own Sithiness. And then Luke realizes what he's doing, and he makes what is the best line in Star Wars. No, I am a Jedi like my father before me. And he throws the lightsaber down, and you see his little dark suit has opened up, right? And you see the light that's underneath it, which is fantastic symbolism.
Yeah.
But Luke struggled with his moral ambiguity, but he won over it and became the ultimate hero. And that's Star Wars. That works that way. And we get to see the opposite of that with Anakin in the prequel trilogy. That can be Star Wars too. It's a really interesting take on it. But then what are we doing with 7, 8, 9? What are we doing with Kylo? Kylo was such a really interesting beginning to a character, and he kind of, they lean in The Last Jedi, they lean into him being evil.
Yeah.
Completely, like, irredeemably evil. And then in 9, they're going to try to pull that back and do a 180 and say, no, he's good, and he gets the girl at the end.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Rey is good, and that's nice. But you don't see a lot of people that complain about Rey, other than the fact that she's good at everything, but that doesn't really bother me either. But there are no really good or bad people in Disney era Star Wars, other than Palpatine when he comes back.
Right on. So, yeah, okay. I like this. So, and I'm going to respond before I give my thoughts.
This is terrifying. Okay, go ahead.
Oh,
respond.
no. Well, the first thing I was going to say was, you know, so I think it's worth pointing out that the first thing that kind of both of y'all brought up, or the biggest thing that y'all brought up, they are both things that not exclusively, but kind of mostly apply to the original trilogy, which is the Star Wars y'all saw when y'all were youngest. You know what I mean? Not to say that you're wrong for thinking that, but I think that to an individual, what they see Star Wars as, more than likely, it's going to be what they saw when their ideas were most open, when their minds were most open to just take in what it is, not what they wish it was. That's what I struggle with on every new Star Wars thing. I'm not watching a new episode of The Acolyte when an episode of The Acolyte comes out. I'm watching and constantly having to go against my own mind of, wait, well, how does that apply to episode 7 of Rebels? Wait, but how does that connect to... Oh, wait a minute, that pushes back against... Because we've been in the bag for this for a long time. A 7-year-old watches The Acolyte and is like, oh, okay. Well, you know, is what it is. And then they go back to playing with Legos. And I'm not saying that, Lance, you're wrong for any of the things that you're saying. That is not what I'm trying to communicate at all. But I think that the first thing that... It's why I think the sequels are eventually going to be revered. Because to 8-year-olds, they don't have a Luke Skywalker other than Sad Man on The Last Jedi Island. They have Rey. You know what I mean? And Rey will inform every Star Wars hero moving forward. Because that was their first. But I think that, to me, just quickly, what makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars is that it's science fantasy, not science fiction. What makes it feel like Star Wars is when the pacing is faster, more intense. When the characters and the music have their emotions on their sleeves. You don't really necessarily have to interpret what's going on. You know what's going on because the storytelling is that clear. I will give you, I've said it about The Acolyte, that is something that bugged me in that while they were open about how they were going to tell a story from the Sith's perspective, which means it is going to be a little more morally complicated, they had to kind of intentionally make things ambiguous. And to me, Star Wars is at its best when it is clear what is going on. Like you watch The Binary Sunset. If it was the prequels, George would probably have given Luke a whole monologue about how much he wants to be, I just want to go to the wars in the stars. Maybe not that on the nose, but you know what I mean? But it wasn't. It was he's going to have him stand on the top of the hill in his backyard and look up at the sky and wish he was anywhere other than where he is. The biggest problem that Star Wars has in general is also its greatest strength in that it is so universal. Everybody is going to see different things in it, and everybody's right. Sam Witwer had a quitwer. Sam Witwer had a quitwer?
Sam Witwer had a
Good
quitwer.
God.
I was going to say, is that the beginning of a limerick, or what are we doing here?
Sam Witwer had a quitwer, and whatever. Anyway, that's going to come back to me in a bad way. So Sam Witwer had a quote from something. I'm never not taken in this stuff, and I really should do a better job of saying where it came from. But leading up to Episode 7, he was like, the problem is everybody understands this Star Wars, and they're all right. Some people look at it and they see, 1940s Flash Gordon serials, and they're right, that's in there. Some see the Iliad, and they're right, that's in there. Some see, philosophy and The Hero of a Thousand Faces, and they're right, that's in there. George has talked about, of course, that he pulled from Akira Kurosawa. He also very transparently pulled from Dune. He also pulled from Wizard of Oz. He cast a wide net and put all this stuff in it while making it feel very, very universal. But the first time that Star Wars bumped people was not the prequels or even the sequels. It was The Empire Strikes Back. I can't remember what it's called right now, but there's a Star Wars fan magazine that shut down when The Empire Strikes Back came out because they were like, what is this? This is like sad and depressing. And Star Wars is family films. This is dumb. They've lost it. Charles Lippincott, one of the producers of A New Hope, said that Star Wars lost its way with The Empire Strikes Back. It's like, as soon as you brought in a Muppet, you lost what it was. Like, what is this? Now, I do think I agree, Lance, with kind of your biggest thing of the moral graying. The risk that you run with a story like that, to me, is that you lose the point of a myth, right? To me, a mythology is we're going to sit around the campfire, we're going to tell the kids a story that has a moral that you can learn from. Ultimately, to me, the Acolyte points to what happens when, number one, when you lie to someone for 16 years, you never give her her own choices, you've created a problem. And I don't think the show glorifies her for that. I think you're supposed to watch her holding hands with the stranger at the end of the show with Darth Plagueis creeping in the cave and going, ugh, a lot of bad stuff has happened. This is bad. I feel complicated about this. Now, if they do make a season 2 and it turns out that, like, it's just like heroic music as she's slaughtering Jedi, then I'll be like, oh, okay, I think they might have jumped the shark on this one. I don't know, maybe at least the fight choreo is cool, and I'll look forward to talking about it. But I think that when you make it morally ambiguous, you make the point of the story up for debate. I will also say it's a fun thing. Lance, you literally said it before I did. We'll have a Last Jedi review eventually, but to me, Luke Skywalker is my favorite character, kind of with the exception of The Last Jedi. And that's kind of what makes Ahsoka my favorite. I will say, it is important to note, though, he ends The Last Jedi himself again.
Yeah.
He has gone back to, and I will not be the Last Jedi. Like, they're coming back. It's one of, for all my quibbles about that movie, it's one of my favorite scenes in the saga of Yoda and Luke watching the Jedi Order burn down again.
See you around, kid.
Talking about how... oh no! Well, I bump up against.
Oh,
that
I love it!
a lot.
I love that moment.
I missed it.
Well,
What'd
it's a
you
whole
say?
other.
See you around,
See
kid.
you around, kid.
When
Oh yeah.
when he just like forces out, and he's like, ah.
Yeah.
But part of why Luke, I still struggle with him. If Luke Skywalker, the same guy that redeemed Darth Vader, who did nothing but try to murder him and his friends for 3 movies. If Luke Skywalker believes he failed Ben Solo, why is he trash-talking him in his last time to talk to him? I bump up against that in a big way. That's like an action hero line and not a Luke Skywalker line of, I am why you are like this and I'm sorry. Just to go, see you around, kid. And then like, haha, bye. It doesn't really make any sense to me at all.
I think the plan was originally to have him come back and haunt Ben as a Force ghost, and
Sure.
then it would have been amazing. You know, be like, hey, I'm back.
Sure.
I said see you around. Why are you doing this?
Well, and
That's the TV show I want to see.
Right.
Just unrelentlessly haunting him, just following him from room to room.
Why are you doing that?
well, and the consistency.
Your mom wouldn't like that. Why are you doing that? Man, you are
I'm not
evil.
touching you. I'm not touching you.
Well, and the consistencies of the sequels that's the biggest thing, more than anything. I think everybody knows. That's the biggest problem that they have. Like, love the original trilogy, dislike the original trilogy, it is consistent. Love the prequels, dislike the prequels, they're consistent. The sequels, it's obvious they didn't have a plan, and they didn't have a plan for the other two trilogies either. But they had the same guy, same plaid-wearing bearded dude, making a lot of the main decisions. And but Lance, thank you for the question. If that's not obvious, I hope it didn't come off like I was trying to dunk on you. That was not what I was trying to do.
I don't think.
But this is
the future will tell. But we'll look in the comments to see how people feel. But yeah.
I think a lot of what,
like I said when I
didn't get to respond to you, Lance. I think a lot of what you said is very true. You know, I think Star Wars is for kids. I've said it before. It is for kids that everyone can enjoy, and the grayness, I think, is a effort to try and make it not for kids. You know, trying to like age it up too much. But I think maybe that's why you're feeling the way you feel. Like maybe it's them being like, oh, like yeah, like we're gonna make the Acolyte for like 35-year-olds, you know, 30-year-olds, you know, and then you watch and you're like, wait, this is not the Star Wars that I grew up with, because it's not, you know, like it's not, I guess it's not for kids, but it should be aimed at kids for them to watch and understand. And maybe that's where it's losing its way, is it's losing the morals and the oh my gosh, sorry, my screen just went blank. You're missing the morals and the storytelling that is more transparent.
Absolutely.
Well, Lance, you were about to say something.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
remember.
cut you off.
Oh no, you're fine. So what I was going to say is just what I said from the beginning is I don't really know. I've had a horrible time trying to put my finger on what it is that works and what it is that doesn't work. And it's this, and some of it is that I just don't have the education or the training for it. But you know, a lot of these people that are making it when it is not working have the education and the training, right? I mean, so it's just kind of this like hiding in the corners secret formula for Star Wars, and I don't know how much of that is what's on the screen and how much of that is what I'm bringing to my viewing experience. But it really bothers me when there is a bad Jedi, and so the response to that is the Jedi are bad.
Yeah.
And I think that concept has been haunting, bring back the word, haunting Disney era Star Wars for a long time now. And even outside of the story, you can say, okay, well, that episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi was bad, and so Obi-Wan Kenobi is bad. That scene from that episode of The Acolyte, that line is bad, and so that show is bad.
Yeah.
You know, they can't view something without letting it be poisoned. It has to be absolute perfection from beginning to end. And if you take those rules and apply them to anything, I mean, Luke kissed his sister. You can't apply those rules to anything in the Star Wars universe or out of the Star Wars universe and have it hold up.
Yeah.
So let's be a little forgiving with the way we
view our Star Wars. Yeah.
Well, and I don't mean to sound like I've loved all of the everything Star Wars. It's still my favorite franchise, but it's got its blemishes for me, for sure. But it's part of why I finally texted Zach, and I was like, hey, man, we've been talking about this for forever. We're having a podcast. Was that I wanted to be able to talk about these things. And the episode that came out over the weekend, or the last episode, was Kai bringing, our first guest, bringing a really, really totally different perspective to me and the Acolyte. And I started to see things that I wasn't seeing before, and I was like, okay, cool. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that makes Star Wars work the best is George Lucas's quote about it being purely about being selfless and not selfish. That is the whole thing. And if you have that and you couple it with silly monsters, pacing, characters going through things we can relate to, I think if you do that, it's going to work. probably, the biggest thing that I hadn't really thought about for the Acolyte before when we just brought it up, it is not necessarily a show that I think a kid would watch. Mm-hmm. It's almost too specific in a way. Whereas like you watch The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian is so universal and simplistic. He is a gunslinger that finds out he has a heart of gold because of this kid that he has feelings for. You know what I mean? That's it. And as long as they stick to that, it probably works. So I guess after saying Star Wars is what you want it to be, I do think when it is simplified and focused and like archetypal, it works. What were you going to say?
Just a disclaimer as well, in case people don't know, we do want the Acolyte to be renewed. We are fans.
Oh, absolutely.
And it does bring conversation to the universe, just so that we're not, so somebody doesn't watch this clip and go, oh, they hate the Acolyte,
No, I loved it. So I was just having a conversation with a casual Star Wars fan last week who is a movies only Star Wars fan. Will not watch TV shows. All right, fine. However you do it is fine. But this guy has a Star Wars T-shirt on like every day, and so I always want to talk Star Wars with him. I finally had the opportunity, and so we were talking about the Acolyte, and he said, "Okay," he said, "I'm never going to watch that show. What is that show?
Yeah.
Just what is the plot line of it? Just tell me what that show is. Just spoiler it." So I said, "Okay." So in 30 minutes, I told him the plot of season 1, and he said, "That sounds awesome." I said, "It does sound awesome, doesn't it?" Like it really is a great idea for a story. And I think that the things that didn't work aren't enough to keep it from being a great show.
Yeah.
Really.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I've got a quote here from the guy that directed my most favorite and least favorite Disney Star Wars movie. I know that we don't necessarily talk about ranking these things, but for me, J.J. Abrams fits. He's the only guy that's directed to, but he fits both of those. So somebody, I think this came from Variety, but this was leading up to Rise of Skywalker, and this guy asked J.J. what he would say to those who are unhappy with the last couple films. He says, "Are those fans not getting something, and or is there a problem in the fandom?" And J.J. said, "No. I would say that they're right." And then he went on to say, "The people who love it more than anything are also right. So how do you go about pleasing everybody?" And JJ said, I was like, what? Not to say that that's what anyone should try to do anyway, but how would one go about it, especially with Star Wars? I really appreciate the humility to be like, hey, if they don't like your movie, how do they feel about it? He goes, I mean, they're right. They're also right if they liked it. I don't know. I just made a funny movie about space wizards. I do think, I mean, real talk, it's a simple answer. What makes Star Wars feel like Star Wars? George Lucas. You know, it's part of why Clone Wars is peak for me, to steal a quote from kids, is that George Lucas was the idea man, right?
Yeah.
And then Dave Filoni is the actual executor of it. It's all over his movies. George struggles with dialogue. But as far as ideas, that guy is the best. And you know, maybe one day if enough people continue to be positive about him, he'll come back. And then I hope they welcome him with open arms. I also don't think he's the Messiah. I just think that he that
praise the maker,
boundless creativity. Praise the maker. That boundless creativity that he has of just Anakin as a Padawan. I don't care. We're doing this. We're gonna figure it out later. It works. So anyway, well, I think we did it. We figured out what makes Star Wars.
Excellent.